gel sachets. These are the things that you get sent in, I don't know, optical or electrical stuff that you might purchase online. These little sachets, they have crystals in them, they absorb moisture. Take the drawers that hold the tools in that have got the most amount of exposed steel, like your hand planes and your chisels, and liberally spread this stuff around, and that will stop your metal from rusting. It'll keep the moisture at bay. So now that you've seen on a standard job site table saw like this DeWalt 745, I can stack 3 standard blades together. There's a lot of things that you can do with that. So, a perfect half lap, absolutely perfect, every single time. Here's another example of something that you can do using those 3 blades stuck together. This piece of wood is run through, like so, and then if I flip it around, but leave this in the same place, and run, I get this nice wide groove. So that makes my lovely wide groove there. And then I lower the blade down to here. I can then, in combination with the T-square, I can wear all this stuff away by obviously moving the fence over in order to set the shoulder. Then when I turn this way, I can raise the blade up to this height, and that will get me all the way to there. And that basically means that you're in a situation where you can cut these kind of joints. And I have put entire doors together using this system here. So you can see here, it's perfectly centralized because it works on the same system as the half lap where you're trying to find the middle of something. This is perfect for putting in raised panels. There we go. You get a perfect joint every time. And after you drill that hole, you wanted to plug it, that's the perfect size thing. But why don't you just take your pencil sharpener, and you'll notice that you've got 2 holes. Use the bigger hole, puts a perfect chamfer on there every time, and it immediately fits in. So you can use the big hole for just your normal 9mm down. Waxing the shaft of your clamps with just normal machine wax will help glue come off. If it sticks to it, it'll make it work easier. 2 pairs of glasses. My vision at close range is magnified significantly by putting 2 pairs of glasses on. Another way around the problem is to buy a magnifying glass, and this is a little cheapie, £4, $6, whatever. It's got batteries in it. I press that button, little lights come on, press it again, more lights. Oh, look at that. I've got a splinter. If you look down here, this comes out here. See these grooves in here and this cutout here? Fits in there, gives me a nice big wide working surface. At the front and back of the table saw, I've got these spacers between the chassis of the saw and the stand that it sits on. The net effect of that is that I've killed 2 birds with 1 stone. I have made it more comfortable to use because I'm 6'1", it's higher up, and it also means that the table behind it, the router table, can now double as an outfeed table because it's now the perfect height because of those spacers. Oh dear, I've lost my pencil and I want to put a mark across here. Oh look, if I pull that little thing out there, I've got a perfectly sharp little scratch mark there. And every time you look on all of your set squares, you'll see these little things here. And if you pull them out, you've got a marker for scratching. That's a zero clearance insert, and that fits in there. But the problem with that is that it's inflexible. It can only do one thing. It can only cope with that thickness of blade. If I wanted to incline the blade or put a thicker blade in, it would be useless, and I'd have to change it and make another one. So why not take a zero clearance insert like this, and by cutting a dovetail slot in here, this obviously fits in just like every other normal one, fits in like that, but it means that I can put these pieces of wood that have also been cut at, I think it's 15 degrees on either side, and now that would accommodate cutting dados, because you can see that's where my dado stack's gone through it, or in this particular case I would just take this one, which has got that little slot in it, and that is designed for the thin curved blade that I've got in at the moment. And for anything else that I wanted, I would just take any of these blanks and put these blanks in, and I could cut anything that I wanted to. Keep one of these little flexible hose ends, you see, and it means that I can disconnect that, plug it straight into there, and then switch on the vacuum cleaner. And when I've finished with it, plug it back in there. Just leave that there. A little bit of machine wax on a paper towel on a regular basis over all of the surfaces that have got cast iron will remove and help keep in good working order. You could even see the colour of a little bit of surface rust that I've removed from that. If time allows, a really good tip is to organise your router drawer in such a way that you cut profiles of little pieces of wood, so that if you take out a router or a tool like that, you don't have to sit there and imagine the effect that it would have on a piece of timber, because you've got an example of it. So it's much easier to just take out a piece of wood, look at the profile of it and decide whether or not that's what you want. This is way better than trying to use a laser. If I switch the laser on, can you see the laser? No, I can't either, but it's there. It's just going across my finger. But how much easier is it to cut when all you've got to do is to compare it against the kerf cut that you've got left in this? This is way better than a laser. A dry film anti-stick material. So by spraying this onto the mechanism underneath, it means that it lubricates it in a way where it doesn't attract the sawdust to stick to it, because if I was to do this with an oil or a grease, it might seem very smooth initially, but then it's just going to be an absolute magnet to any kind of dust. So a little application of this, spray it on the moving parts. These are probably the easiest things to lose. This is the chuck key, and all I did was to fit everything inside this magnetic tray. It's got magnets on the back of it, so that now fits to the chassis, and I can put the original one in there as well. On the back of your fence, there's these two clips that hold your push stick. But actually down on the right hand side, you've got these two clips here, and that's designed to be able to put your push stick on there. If you've got a brand new hand plane, they have very, very sharp corners here. And Rob Korsman, who I have got the greatest of respect for, is probably one of the best people who will give you good advice on how to set up a hand plane. And his recommendation is to take a file and to rub that file just down these edges in order to take them off. But I couldn't bring myself to put a file against that. I just decided that a simpler thing to do would be to take the 1000 grit stone like so, put a bit of compound on there, like that, and then literally take the edge, turn it around, do the other side, clean it off, and then that way you've got tiny little gentle chamfers on either side of your plane. When your compressor is not in use and the air is really running out, see on the back of the compressor is this valve here. If you open this valve here, any water that is trapped inside that has condensed will come out of here, and you'll see it.
There's no water that's come out of here because every time I use the compressor I always drain it. But on the occasions where I've left it, it builds up water. So this makes your compressor last a lot longer because it doesn't fill up with rust. So you can turn that off. This is a blade from a multi-tool, and that blade is really, really tired. And these are expensive, but don't throw them away. You can easily sharpen these, like a little needle file. It's got a very sharp edge, and you can and now it's got all its teeth back in it. So that's after sharpening. So you can resharpen these. When you're going to screw things together, you're looking for the perfect drill in order to accommodate that screw. And here's a picture of this screw. And you can see that I've got the fluting on the outside of it, and I've got the shank here. And the actual thickness of the shank, which is only 3 millimeters, and the thickness of the fluting is 4.2. So actually the correct thickness for this would be a 3 millimeter drill. And there is a 3 millimeter drill. Another way around it is that you could place the flute over the shank like that, and you could look at it, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to obscure the shank but still be able to see the fluting. That is another way to do it. And another way to do it, which is kind of like reassuring, is if you take the tip of this and you drive the tip just into this piece of card. You could do it on paper, it works just as well. And then making sure that you don't push it through, okay? And now if I undo it, what I'll be left with is the hole which is only the thickness of the shank. So therefore this 3 millimeter drill will fit perfectly into there. So that's a really good way to reassure yourself if you haven't got a set of calipers handy. You can go over and take a cheaper plane that you bought from a shop where it was made of an inferior quality and the finishing was inferior, and you could actually tune up your sole on here to make sure it's completely flat. LED strip lights, half the cost of normal bulbs, 5 times brighter. Let's say for argument's sake that you had to paint this piece of wood, but you had to paint this piece of wood on both sides. And you didn't want it resting on something as soon as you painted it because that might interfere with the finish that you'd put on. Take your nail gun, put in the longest nails that you've got, and holding this section back here with your fingers either side, so you're holding that back, hold it about 1 inch away, and then you can rest your job like that. Okay, so this is my final tip, and this one is to do with box joints. This is my box joint jig, and this one is slightly different. On the back of my jig, you can see I've attached this to a T-square, and you can see down here I've got these wing nuts, and that means that this jig is infinitely adjustable. By slackening these off, I can move the whole jig slightly over to the left or slightly over to the right. And that's important because you'll find that when you make these jigs, sometimes after 6 months of use, or maybe longer or maybe less depending on the humidity in your area, you'll find that when you cut your box joints, you'll find that sometimes they can be too tight or too loose. And so by having that adjustability, it means that you can adjust your box joint jig and you can cut perfect box joints every time. Most people think of box joints as tiny little joints, but you can actually make them quite big like this. I mean, that would work if you didn't have space to do a scarf joint, and it's certainly very strong. And then you have your traditional box joint like so. Strong, attractive, and iconic. I hope you've enjoyed this video and found it useful. I hope there's been at least 2 or 3 tips and tricks that you're unaware of. And that being the case, it was time well spent. Please consider subscribing. It would mean an enormous amount to me and it would help me grow this channel. Thanks for watching.